Hello, everybody. Bob Costrignano here with another episode of HazChat brought to you by HazMat 101 Consultants. As you can tell from the background, it's a little different, and my cohort is not sitting next to me. That's because this show was actually going to be the year in review for December 2023. But we had a lot of inquiry about a mentorship program and doing a show on that. So we decided to do that show for December, and we're going to drop this one for January 1st. Looking back at some of the previous shows, and by all means, please go to our YouTube channel, check out the previous HazChat shows as well as our other show, Spotlight. We wish you all the best in 2024. Have a healthy, happy, and safe new year. And remember, when you're through learning, you're through.
My good friend and co-host there, Derek Shawman, just got promoted to District Chief of the City of Orlando Fire Department and has been a HazMat technician for many, many years. So now that he's in that role, he looks at things a little differently. And before we get started, I just want to say a couple things for me is when I got promoted up to lieutenant, I wasn't fortunate enough to get all the way to the rank of district chief before I retired. I will honestly say, Derek, and I think you will agree, that being a HazMat tech before I was lieutenant made me look at fires and scenes a little differently when I did finally ride that right seat of the rig.
Oh, definitely. I think that just the process of being a HazMat technician, and we start to size things up a little bit differently. It's not that fire-oriented people don't have the same abilities to do things, but I think that HazMat challenges us to look at things a little bit differently and to consider things from different angles, and that can help you out on any type of incident. So whether it's because you're a HazMat technician or you're someone who just really studies incident philosophy and different ways of looking at it, I think that being a HazMat tech really helped out in that aspect.
So before we get on like OSHA and all the other stuff, your first 3 or 4 shifts as a district chief, you had like a HazMat call every shift, right? Now you were actually put in a district where you have 2 HazMat truck companies that are under your command, not for HazMat, but truck companies in your district. They just happen to be HazMat because that area has the most real HazMat calls in the city. So you've had a few jobs, as they say, related to HazMat within your first 3 weeks.
Yeah, I've been fortunate to have a nice diverse collection of responses, but HazMat has definitely played a role in those, in addition to the fires and extrications and shootings and everything else.
Good old American street violence.
The HazMat has been something that, oddly enough, seemed to start right about the same time that I got the position.
But being a district chief, though, and having that HazMat background, I mean, that definitely helped you with those calls. I mean, we can't talk about some of the calls right now for different, legality reasons, but that helped you, right?
Oh, definitely. It helped me to better understand and anticipate how I could support my HazMat crews that were actually handling the incident. So I had to take a moment and realize that, my job is not to formulate the full plan and to direct everything. My job was to anticipate their needs and monitor what they have going on, and if they had any need for me as a resource, I was there available, but really allowing them to do their job while also making sure that I was informed as to what was going on.
Yeah, I was a hands-on guy myself, so it's hard to just sit back and let other people formulate the plans. But so when we look at this, we start talking, we're not going to get down in the weeds of the OSHA regulations and stuff like that, but the incident commander really needs to be operations level, and that's pretty much it, with obviously the annual required training. But you said now with the new 470, there's a little more direction. Can you go into that a little bit?
Well, 470, which addresses the standards for competencies and the professional standards also, recognizes that the HazMat incident commander needs to complete all the requirements for awareness level and operations level. And in addition to that, needs to satisfy the competencies of Chapter 12 and the professional standards listed in Chapter 13 of NFPA 470, which are very basic. It's, the ability to interpret information, to analyze the incident. They need to have an understanding of PPE selection criteria and use, decontamination options. They need to understand how to formulate an incident action plan and understand the termination processes. So there is more than just operations level that is expected for people who take that incident command role. But as far as their training for the functional portion, the hands-on portion of HazMat, they would be operational level. The rest of it is more of an understanding of the overall incident structure.
And we've both had the chief pull up on the scene, not the fire chief, but a chief, who says, I used to be on HazMat, 50, 100 years ago, whatever. But for the most part, a lot of the chiefs just got their hands off. I know the answer, but some may not know the answer. Who is ultimately responsible on the HazMat scene?
So there is a little bit of gray area there, but when you really look at it, it would be the senior HazMat technician. They're the ones who should be calling the shots. They have the most experience, the highest level of training and competency. That's the expectation, that the most senior person would have that. So essentially, they're the ones who should be running that operation. And that's also why in an ICS system, your incident commander can also delegate the operation out to HazMat group leader. It doesn't have to be the incident commander trying to juggle all the resources and expectations for the incident. They're there as a liaison and support function a lot of times, where usually you will have a technician who's steering exactly what's going to be done. And it's just making sure that everyone on the scene's informed, and that, no one likes surprises. Everyone wants to know what's going on.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things that has really, I guess, bothered me is that, we've had chiefs that would show up to training and sign a roster and leave. And I'm not saying our department, there's other departments that I'm sure it's the same thing, or they don't really participate as much as they should. And then especially with the HazMat Ops Review class, we go around and teach around the country, it's very rare that chiefs show up to that class. And really, if anybody needs it, it's them. We're going over meters and stuff in that class for that first arriving engine company, truck company, whatever the unit is. But it's also, in my opinion, the time when the chief should be in there too, because it's geared towards them. And instead of just clicking a mouse, and that's a class that Derek and I are going to be, and you're hearing it first right here, clicks versus competency, a new class coming from HazMat 101 consultants at your next conference and more. But that's what it is. It's people are clicking on stuff instead of being competent at things. And I think we're, just because you got a couple of these on your collar doesn't mean, that's it. You got to rely on your people. And honestly, if it were me, I would want to know what my people are doing.
Almost anymore, and I hate to say it, but I think, Derek, you'll agree, almost every call is a HazMat call now.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is we live in a world that is filled with chemicals. It always has been. We just didn't know that those chemicals were there.
Right.
As we become more knowledgeable of these things, we start to realize, the entire world is chemistry. But more and more, the things that we deal with every day, we're bringing in more hazardous chemicals, whether it's cleaning products, all the DIYers that are doing their own paint stripping or bathtub refinishing, or people coming in with scooters, all sorts of things. We're bringing more stuff into our home that previously we saw more in commercial or light industrial settings. So yeah, everything we run on, there's a potential there. There are hazardous chemicals everywhere we're going. and we have to figure out, are they in some way a factor in the call we're running on?
Right, right. And like I said before, it's those that have more knowledge, more training need to, get the other ones trained up. So let's jump right into this. The first one, a headache. How many times have we been dispatched to a headache? And oh, geez, especially 3 o'clock in the morning, right?
Oh, yeah.
But some things, some food for thought is you arrive on scene and the headache, what could be going through your mind? They just have a headache, obviously, duh. But what if there's multiple people that have headaches? That's what we call a clue. We need to start thinking about some other things. Somebody's blood pressure medication might be a change. Simple as that. There could also be maybe there's some kind of carbon monoxide incident going on. And maybe not even in that apartment. This actually happened to me where we had a couple sick people in an apartment, and it wasn't until we went next door and we realized that there was a problem from a minute gas leak from the adjacent apartment, and that's why these two individuals had a headache.
Yeah. And especially carbon monoxide. I mean, I've had 2 calls where the way that we found out we had a carbon monoxide problem was because we got phone calls from emergency departments who had patients, and they're like, "Hey, we've got this person and we're testing them, and they came in with flu-like symptoms, but blood work's saying carbon monoxide. Can you go check this location?" One was actually from the state of Texas. Their poison control contacted us, and we ended up shutting down a 5-story hotel for 48 hours because we were getting carbon monoxide readings on 4 of the 5 floors.
Yeah. So that's just a simple headache call turned into a carbon monoxide alarm. And a lot of departments, there's some recent training I did for a department where they have a single sensor CO sensor, right? CO single sensor on their life pack or EMS bag, whatever it was. And they've done that to kind of alert them if they're walking into a CO incident. But one of these people actually took that in to do air monitoring. And I want to caution everybody on that because and they had no other PPE on, so what we always say, if you have something in your hand for, metering wise, you better have something on your face. And that, while I applaud the effort, probably not a good move in that part, but that's why we train, right? So it was a training evolution. We talked about it afterwards, and, they know not to do that next time.
Well, and that's where, like you said, with training, we run a risk sometimes with blurring the lines between what is operations level and what is technician level.
Right.
A lot of departments that are running these single CO sensors, they're usually attached them to a piece of EMS equipment like you were talking about. That is a passive monitoring system. That is designed for if you're on an EMS call and it just so happens to go off, that's kind of an indicator. Oh, I've got an environmental concern here. It's not really something that we should be using to seek things out because it's not telling us the other components of air. It's not telling us what else is going on. So carbon monoxide can be coming with other hazards. So going in and using a standalone carbon monoxide sensor, and we're not monitoring O2, and we don't have guys using SCBA, now we've got a problem. We got people who think that they're using something in a safe manner, but are putting themselves at greater risk because they don't have the full spectrum of detection of what they should be using on that call, and are probably becoming complacent and not using the PPE.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So let's move on to the next one. Check the well-being. Boy, we've never gone on any of those either, huh? This is, I always hated these calls because this is the one that's like, oh, are there flies on the window? You see the window moving and it's not the window, it's the amount of flies. That always, got me. Or you open up the cab the truck and you, oh, yeah, you don't need to go any further, boys.
That or the mailbox stuffed full.
Stuff full of mail.
It's not going to be a good day.
It's not going to be a good day. But the simple check the well-being call, this is one of those where a single engine company went, a run we had, and it was one of those hotels converted into like apartments, and it had that hotel throw on it, and as soon as they were able to just crack the door, they saw on the side of the TV said DNR for do not resuscitate, and they're like, ooh. And we had just had a chemical suicide class not too long before that, so they knew to call HazMat. And once we forced the door, that's exactly what this turned out to be. Was they hadn't heard from this woman in a while, and she had committed suicide with a helium bag type method. This isn't a suicide class. We'll talk, or show. We'll talk about that another time. But there again, a simple check the well-being call, and our particular first aid unit had no air monitoring equipment, so at least they thought enough to recognize the call of HazMat.
Mm-hmm. Especially because just because we're getting the well-being check where they haven't heard from that person in a week or maybe 2 weeks doesn't mean that the event occurred a week or 2 weeks ago.
Right.
They may have just been ignoring calls, and within the last 12 hours, they've done something, and we're getting there while the byproducts are still at significant concentrations that they can cause harm to us. And we need to be smart with these things and think about them a little bit differently, because whether it's a chemical suicide or some sort of a release, or just someone who doesn't want to be stopped, or someone who just doesn't like people knocking on their doors, we have to be smart about keeping our personnel safe.
Yep. Very good point. And they may not want to be bothered, and you don't know if there's a weapon involved, or which brings up a question. How about this one? What do you do for the check the well-being? We used to call, and now that I'm gone, you could answer this better than I. We wouldn't do anything, force entry or whatever, till law enforcement got there and cleared the building. So do we allow law enforcement to go in without any kind of metering equipment? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, there's been a lot of discussion back and forth with agencies, I'm sure across the country, with different events that have occurred. Firefighters that have been unintentionally shot thinking that they were intruders because they startled someone awake. Same thing with law enforcement officers. Law enforcement officers also have the additional burden of, if they go in and they see something else that's a crime, it puts them in a very difficult position of, you want to not have people refuse aid and assistance because they're worried about the criminal aspect, but at the same time, if they're seeing a crime, it kind of makes it difficult for them. So what a lot of agencies are going to, and it's going to become more and more common, is now it's a knock on the door. Mm-hmm. If no one answers and we give a good look, we're not forcing entry into a lot of these buildings anymore, because
right.
The risk is too great. And when we force entry into these residences, especially apartment buildings, things like that, and the person's just not home, well, now who repairs that door?
Right.
We, as firefighters and first responders, even law enforcement, we're all doing it with the best of intentions. We're imagining that diabetic patient passed out on the floor that's been down for a couple of days, and we're there to help. But the reality is, we're breaking into someone's domicile,
mm-hmm.
not knowing if they're there, not knowing if they need help, and either causing damage when it wasn't needed, or going in and the person's just sleeping and had their phone turned off and a family member couldn't get a hold of them. And now that person who is thinking that they are in harm's way, they direct, whether it's a weapon or even just physical force towards us, thinking we're an intruder.
Right.
It's a delicate balancing act. And that's where, I think a lot of departments, law enforcement and fire together, are kind of drawing a line and saying, this is as far as we go. From there, family needs to maybe reach out and have a key or something to get in.
Yeah. Well, and too, we always talk about doing 360 size ups for fires and whatever. You can walk around the structure and see a lot through windows, hopefully. And you may not, but that's something to be cautious for. So, all right, let's jump to the next one. Difficulty breathing. So again, these first three, this is your typical bread and butter EMS calls. Difficulty breathing could be an asthma patient, could be chemical suicide again from an adjacent apartment. There's all kinds of things that could be going on.
Maybe they came into contact with methylene chloride, which is a chemical asphyxiant. It's going to create that carbon monoxide, and it's going to block everything. And it's a chemical asphyxiant. I mean, we don't know.
We don't know. So
We have to ask.
I would say if you're going to somebody with difficulty breathing, obviously you want to try and get as much information as possible. But that's where I would get back. If you have a computer terminal in your rig, try to see what the notes say. If they don't tell you it smells like a chemical odor or something like that, have dispatch call back and ask them why they're having difficulty breathing. Is it from a substance? Do they smell something? Try to get that investigative action going while you're en route. Then you can hopefully make a better assessment and not just walk into something yourself. Because it could be something as simple. They mix cleaning products. Hell, we've done it at the firehouse and had people overcome. We had to send firemen to the hospital.
Yeah. And I mean, for the longest time, there were a lot of us and myself, I'm guilty of it, well, if the person's talking or we're having a conversation, they're breathing fine.
Right.
Well, as diligent responders, whether we're HazMat technicians or EMS personnel, we have to appreciate the fact that you can have difficulty breathing and it may not be outwardly apparent without us doing some additional assessment. Check their oxygen saturation. Check their end tidal. Are they actually having a full respiratory cycle that's blowing off the right amount of CO2? If you have access to do SPCO, go ahead and do it. It doesn't cost anything. It's literally a probe you put on their finger. And now we've ruled out through 3 different technologies what kind of problems may be occurring there.
Oh, but wait, then I got to do an EMS report.
Yeah.
So what? That's part of your job,
And do my air monitoring. Is there something in the air?
Right.
Because if it's any different inside the structure than it was when I was outside, the outside air and the inside air should be relatively the same.
Right.
Any change from the outside air to the inside air should be making me look a little bit further.
Right. Exactly. And then we have your house fire. My pet peeves about this one. So there are many units, and pay attention out there, people. There are many departments that are using a 4 or 5 gas meter so that they can come off air. Derek knows this is our pet peeves, but especially me. We've both lost some good friends to cancer from the job, and this detector does not tell you if there's cancer in the air, which I actually had somebody tell me that's what they're looking for, and we had to educate them. Your meter is only looking at 4 or 5 things depending on the type of meter you have. There are 25 plus things that are being exposed post-fire. We did independent testing and found hydrogen cyanide. Was it 15 feet from the structure? 10, 15 feet from the structure? Outside after a fire. So these are things that are still being emitted after a fire. I had a conversation with a firefighter the other day that said, yeah, well, when the fire marshal comes in, they want to know if it's all clear for CO. That's all they care about. And I said, well, did you explain to them all the other things? They said, well, we will now. So there are things that we can do. What's my famous saying about air packs and cascade systems, Derek?
Never see a credit card swipe machine attached to a cascade or an air fill station.
Air's free, people. Wear your air pack. But not going to beat that one up too much because I think we've mentioned that before. But please do not utilize air monitoring to A, turn the building back over to the occupant because you're missing so many other chemicals and putting yourself at risk. And 2, also point the fact that you're only looking at a couple of things. So 1, could be hurting somebody else, and 2, you could still be hurting yourself.
Yep. And let's dig a little farther into house fire, and let's switch those words around a little bit. Fire in a house. Any fire that occurs inside the house, because a lot of people think house fire, they're thinking we're pulling a line going in. Pot on the stove. You'd be surprised at how toxic a pot on the stove fire can be, especially depending on what the pot is made of. You got a good stainless steel or cast iron pan.
Yeah.
That's one thing. But when you start getting aluminums that have enamel coatings and all these other things on them, especially cheaper grade stuff that maybe isn't the purest forms of the metals because it was a cheap set that someone got at
Right.
a big box store. Those things are putting off toxic gases that you're not getting from your stainless steel or your cast iron. So
Yep.
a pot on the stove is a fire. It's a fire
Yeah.
in a house.
Yeah.
So
Don't just walk in without
treat
a
it the
mask.
same.
Yeah. And I think if I remember correctly, we had somebody that pensioned out because of that. Or that was part of the reason. There were other things involved in that particular fire, but it was a pot on the stove. So yeah, that's something to consider. Just because,
especially when you think not everybody's using the pot on the stove to cook food. Some people are
Right.
using it for a project. Maybe they're trying to strip something off of a piece of material that they're going to be doing a DIY project. There's so many things, little projects that people are doing that may involve using a stove. So
Exactly.
you don't know what's in that pot until you've confirmed whether it's food or not. So err on the side of caution.
Yeah.
Do some air monitoring, ventilate the structure, check people out.
Ventilation is the key also. Yep. I'm glad you brought that up. And then the overdose. So we're not going to go into the whole fentanyl thing because we've beat that one up enough, I think, over the different shows that we've done, different places. But just a simple overdose. What are we dealing with? What are we coming across? Fentanyl, obviously, we could be coming across something. But keep that in mind. And, I hear people say, well, I'm not going to wear this, and this like we're supposed to. And I said, well, you know what? That's called your general precautions. You're supposed to wear these things on every call. And when something happens to you, the very first thing they're going to ask you, what, Derek, is a district chief? What are you going to ask? What were they doing or not doing?
Mm-hmm.
Not wearing the proper PPE, were you? Okay, so who's at fault?
Exactly.
So,
well, and let me warn you before you go any further. You have said the F word twice now. Not the curse word, but the other word.
I know.
The overdose word. And it's like Beetlejuice. It's like Beetlejuice.
I know.
If you say it a third time, I'm going to go unresponsive. So you've got two. We can't say that word again.
I can't say it anymore.
I don't have any Narcan to self-administer.
Yeah. So there are very good point. There are other things than that other word that can cause overdoses that we need to be aware of and just be cautious as we're approaching it. Don't just think, somebody's passed out, overdose, and it's a routine run. Well, that may very well not be a routine run. So, and then lastly, person passed out. I love this because as Derek and I can certainly attest that 90% of the calls we had at Station 1 after midnight were somebody passed out, thanks to our local law enforcement, using us to clear the streets from the drunks. But it could be something else. It could be somebody had, again, chemical suicide of some sort. It could be an overdose. It could be one of 100 things. So don't just think, they're passed out, I'm going to give them the sternum rub or the, whatever the hell it is you're going to do, because you don't know what you're going to be getting into.
Yeah, you could find yourself at a restaurant with a 80-some-odd-year-old woman passed out in the bathroom, and you're thinking she vagaled out, and that's not what happened. They hooked up to the wrong valve and filled that restroom with carbon dioxide. So,
and that's
if someone passed out, why did they pass out?
Yeah, and that was actually a run that you were on, and that's what happened. Somebody, just a different valve, without going into too much details on it, they hooked up to a valve that wasn't used anymore to pump the CO2 in there, and they ended up filling up a wall and basically displaced all the oxygen in that area.
Yeah, and like Bob was saying, the thing that we have to do is, hazmat calls are happening. They're happening more and more. What's not happening is an awareness of the hazmat team that there was a need to respond to these calls. They're being chalked up as just regular EMS calls, which, yes, we have the patient, we have to treat the patient, but we need to train our first on-scene crews to recognize, okay, I've got 3 people symptomatic in this structure.
Yeah, that's not
why. What do I have? Is it flu season? Yeah, that's one thing. But 3 people with the same symptoms and no obvious reason why, let's bring some other resources in. Bring the hazmat team in, have them do some air monitoring. It's probably something environmental.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the bottom line, folks, is don't be complacent. That routine call you go on, may not be routine. And unfortunately, you're going to be the one that finds out if it is or not. So do your due diligence, size things up right, don't be lazy, and stay safe. That's the best thing you can do. Well, that was just short and good one. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, operations level people, like, I know a lot of times we talk about hazmat, everyone thinks this is the team thing. The hazmat team's the one who needs hazmat training. If there's any operations level people listening to this, and hopefully technician level people are sharing any of the videos that we do or anyone else does, any training, share it with people, because operations level people are the ones who are going to build the foundation of your hazmat call.
Yep.
And we need them to not only make sure the community's safe, but make sure that they're safe, because they're going into these environments and they may not have all the information, but they need to know. Just like when we look at a patient and say, what are the signs and symptoms? Just like when we size up a building, what size is the building? What are the conditions of the building?
Yep.
Every call we go on needs a size up, and we need to ask, why are we here? Yes, this person's sick, but is it potentially something here that made them sick?
Right, exactly. We're going to dive right into it right now. And the first thing we're going to start talking about is good intentions, bad idea. So here's a gas emergency where they used a set of spreaders, hydraulic spreaders, to crimp. I think it was a 3-inch cast iron pipe, if I remember the story correctly. Again, good intention, bad idea. The gas company even commented on it, how lucky they were. And I think, Derek, wasn't this one of the reasons why we never got clamps, hydraulic clamps? Because that's like another level. And at that point, you really should have the experts handle, right?
Yeah, after talking to the gas company about it, they were kind of on the fence about it, with doing any kind of steel lines. There's always the concern about whether or not that line potentially has some fractures in it, some different areas that might cause it to have a running crack. So they kind of preferred that we don't do it. And because we have a good working relationship with our gas company, for our agency, all the things that we do are in cooperation and coordination with them and with their blessing and support. So if they didn't want us to do that, we felt, we'll not do that. We do have a neighboring department that has a hydraulic one. They train on it and are very knowledgeable on it. So in the event that we did need it and the gas company couldn't provide it, we would call them.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely comes down to what you're trained with. We come across a lot of things in our careers that honestly were just made up. I mean, if you go all the way back to 1977 with the first HazMat team in the country, Jacksonville with Captain Ron Gore, I took many of his classes as a young HazMat guy coming up, and he would tell you, we literally were making shit up as we went along because there was no playbook. There was no, whatever. So they had to figure stuff out. And from that kind of, way of going about things, we have we do things a lot of the way now from what they learned back then. So, but this was, again, good intention, just a bad idea. So
yeah.
we need to be careful.
To give them all the credit on it, it worked.
It did. It worked. Absolutely it did.
The gas company did tell them that they got lucky to never do it again.
Right.
And, like you were saying, when HazMat started back quite a while ago, decades ago, it was a lot of trial and error. And there were a lot of things that those early teams were trying, and they found out, oh, yeah, we're never doing that again.
Right.
And
I think we did
one of the things. Yeah, that's one of the things that we have to look out for is just because something worked doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea, because what worked today may not work tomorrow.
Right.
So a lot of it comes down to training and experience and being able to anticipate what goes wrong. Because the question that I have on this one here with the spreaders is, if that pipe fractured, was that department ready to handle the new problem that was created?
Right. Yep. Absolutely. So moving on to some of the things you can do and can get a hold of if you are trying to get into the gas emergency field, so to speak, with your fire department. First off, you need to get the training. That is first and foremost. Get it from the gas company, whoever. But some tools you can get. This is a bucket. Derek, why don't you talk about this a little bit?
So these are just the Edwards and Cromwell brand pipe bands. I mean, they're bands that go around to fix a leaking pipe. They work well on gas lines. I mean, obviously pressures are going to be dependent on certain things, but the benefit to it is you can easily slide it around. So if we have a pipe that's been nicked, it's not completely severed, this is our first go-to because we don't have to interrupt the gas supply. We can keep gas flowing. There may be some critical infrastructure. We've had some where hospitals were downrange of it, or nursing homes, or maybe even schools where the cafeteria is having to reheat the horrible food that they brought in from some sort of warehouse. But being able to keep that service flowing, that's a good one. And you'll see here the crate that we have. There's a piece of poly pipe inside of each one of those band clamps. And the idea for that being is that piece of poly pipe is the size for that band clamp to go on. So instead of having a bunch of loose clamps and trying to figure out which size is which and doing those things, we can literally just bring that crate over. The guys pull out a few of them that look like they're about the same size. They can literally hold that piece of poly pipe with the clamp in it up against the pipe they're working on and get a visual match on size. Makes it much quicker than trying to sort through just a bunch of loose clamps that anyone who's ever used these knows that when they're open, it's hard to tell what size they are. When they're wrapped around a pipe, it gives that visual, makes it a lot easier.
Exactly. And that's especially 3 o'clock in the morning, that's my go-to time, 3 o'clock in the morning. You don't want to try to figure stuff out. And then next we have this little gem.
The PermaCert.
The PermaCert. We would now, well, let's back up just a little bit because we've had discussions with people about should you jump in the hole? Should you dig on either side? Personally, depending on the size of the line, if it's a real small residential line going up the house and I can jump in there real quick and crimp it or finish the cut, so to speak, a nice clean cut, which is how this works. Once you get a clean cut on the hose, it basically goes onto it, locks in place, and you're good to go. If it's something bigger, I would prefer, especially with any kind of pressure coming out, that you go on either side of it and then crimp it that way.
Yeah. Look at what direction that line's going. Dig back 4 or 5 feet in line with it and clamp there. I mean, a lot of it for me comes into how deep is the pipe. Yep. If the pipe's 18 inches down, it's a small half-inch residential line, something like that, can walk right over there, clamp it real quick. We start getting into larger lines, I want to look further back. Right. Especially being here in Florida, our soil is basically sand. And you have to remember that when that gas is free flowing through sand, it's generating static. It's generating a ton of static. You have gas concentrating in that hole. That's the last place that you want to be. That is our last resort, is going into the hole. And then also taking into consideration, if we do go into the hole, what is a hole? Are we talking about 2 feet deep? If you're starting to talk about something where you're at shoulder height when you're down in there, you're going into a trench. And now we need to think about, is this stable enough for us to safely work in there? And why are we in there again? If we can go further back and we can clamp it further back, let's do that.
Exactly. Not to mention, where's all that dirt going? Every crack and crevice of your gear and other parts, that's gonna I feel real good after a while. And then what if you have to go into a structure fire or some other type of emergency later on down, from this run to another? So yeah, definitely.
Well, then the simple PPE thoughts of, take some earplugs so that you're not there listening to this high pressure leak the entire time. And then when you get out of the hole, you're going, what, whenever people are asking you questions because you can't hear.
I can attest to that personally from I think it was a 4-inch or 6-inch gas line downtown in the middle of the night. And it sounded like a jet engine, and dummy me forgot my earplugs and my ears were ringing for about an hour. So yeah, stupid
And
me.
and also know what your capabilities and limitations are. I mean, we know that as far as like our squeeze tools, we do 2-inch lines. 2-inch poly lines is typically where we leave off with our squeeze tools. We do have the ability with our footage clamp to go a little bit more, but 2-inch lines is really kind of what we would stay at. Now we can sleeve up to 3-4-inch lines if we needed to, but again, that's very unique circumstances. And then we have the picture here that Bob put on the screen of the permasert, which would be for an actual severed line.
Right. And you know the old saying, if you can't sleeve it, leave it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Do like the contractors do, just throw a bunch of dirt over it and drive away, pretend you were never there.
Nothing to see here, folks.
Yeah.
One of the things we had is, and this picture was actually from the gas equipment that was on my tower truck, which is one of the HazMat truck companies. But 101 had something similar, and everything you see there is basically that initial try to get a quick, stop of a leak, and all that was just in a compartment. The items you see on the ground were in that saw blade bag. So we took good use of that old blade bag and used that as our gas bag, so to speak. And then we had some of our other clamping devices. 101 HazMat one obviously had a lot more and had some longer Mustang clamps and stuff like that.
Yeah, the towers now have those longer clamps also.
Oh, do they got them
so
now?
that they
Okay,
can
great.
work outside of the hole. They don't have to get into the hole to do as much clamping. So we've come a little way since then, and it's all good. Those permaserts, for anyone who's not familiar with them, they're at the bottom left-hand corner of that picture that Bob has up. If you've ever used a shark bite fitting for plumbing, it's the exact same concept. It's a friction locking cap. You basically chamfer the end of your PVC or your polyethylene line. You cut it clean with PVC cutters, chamfer it, slide that on there, and it will stop that leak. The gas company can actually come back in, they cut the other side off, they run new pipe to the other end, and that will become a permanent union in the ground. At least with our gas company, they'll run them that way. Very, very good tools, and we don't pay $1 for them.
Yeah, that's where
they
it comes
are all
to getting
provided
in
to us.
Yep, that's where it comes into getting with the gas company and having those relationships. That's something we talk about in our politics of hazmat class that Derek and I teach, is making those external relationships, because this is where it comes in handy.
Yeah.
So
well, and with those, we just tell them, hey, we used a 1.5-inch permasert, and they will give us another one right there. We're not down any equipment. We haven't lost anything. There was no consumable loss because we're just exchanging equipment back and forth. The nice thing is we don't have to stay on scene when it's something like that. We can just go ahead and cap it, and we can leave it. Versus when we squeeze something off, we're staying on scene until the gas company can get there, which we're fortunate our gas companies are usually within 30 to 45 minutes. But I know some other areas for teams that may be difficult. A lot of that comes into coordinating with those gas companies ahead of time, find out what they're willing to let you do, explain what training you've had, train with them, because when we say, oh, we're going to go clamp these gas lines, they're going to look and go, what? No, you're not touching our stuff. When you explain to them what your equipment you have, what training you've had, you work with them, it gives them a comfort level that you're not just some cowboy that's going to go running out there and using a hydraulic squeeze tool or wrapping a bunch of duct tape and bending the thing backward, which, I mean, are all potentially viable options when there's nothing else available. But they don't want that liability. At the same time, when you explain it to them and say, do you want the liability of free-flowing gas? That can kind of get their interest, especially when you start talking about the monetary aspect of it. If we can stop that gas line from flowing, it's reducing their liability in the event of a catastrophic event, and it's also reducing their loss. So we're working together in partnership to handle the emergency, but also benefiting them and the PR aspects and the financial aspects of it.
Yeah, and I'll tell you guys out there that are listening too. Derek and I both did this when we both were running the HazMat Tech program at the college here. We would do field trips with the HazMat Tech class, and we would go to our gas company, and they would basically do that portion of the class, and it was great interaction for them, for us, and it checked a lot of their boxes they needed for as far as their on the job training and whatnot. So it worked out really good. So I encourage everybody to reach out to them. So what we're talking about today is decon. We're going to talk a little bit about decon. It actually came up. Well, it's come up a few times in the classes, and Derek and I were just recently teaching a class abroad, shall we say. And part of our air monitoring class that we teach is that we go into decon and how do you pick decon? And there were some questions, and when Derek and I, as a lot of you know, both were the program managers for Valencia College for the HazMat Tech program for a number of years. And, as such, we always teach, as everybody does, the 3-pool decon thing. And I can tell you, in 30 years in the fire service, I actually had to use the 3-pool decon it's maybe 3 times. And it was only because we were in level A suits. And it was only because that's what we've always done. And you really don't need to do that, especially, well, we'll get to it in a second, but you really don't need to do that. And so, but we teach it, and then everybody thinks, okay, well, that's what we can do all the time. And now there's what would you say, Derek, a new way of thinking?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a new way of thinking. It's maybe more of a clarification of how we've been thinking. We have a lot of training scars because we needed to complete the task and make sure the students understood technical decon. A lot of times, and I'm guilty of it, you're guilty of it, I think a lot of training programs we would incorporate a full technical decon into our scenarios because we needed to get the students comfortable with the process and how to set it up.
Right.
But we never really tied in the concept of the chemical properties and whether or not this form of decon was appropriate. And as time's moved on, we have a lot of changes that have been seen over time with started out with the big pushback on taping of PPE, which once we addressed that issue made decon way easier.
Right.
But also ask the question of what's the property of the chemical we're dealing with? Are we in the right suit? And then that brings us to the level A and the technical decon with multiple pools and asking ourselves again, what are we wearing that encapsulating suit for? If we're wearing it for a gas or vapor-based hazard, why are we doing a technical decon? And all the other methods that we taught of decon, adsorption, absorption, degradation, solidification, all those things, we never really hit on them as much as we probably should have. And finally, I think that over time, people started asking questions of, hey, we were taught all these different things. How can we apply this to our decon and actually use it versus just talking about it? And we've seen that huge push lately with the non-wet decon, the electrostatic sprayers and things like that. And I think that down south here, we just kind of went with the luxury of we'll spray water, and looking to our brothers and sisters up north who have below freezing temperatures that they might run hazmat calls in. I think that they were a little bit ahead of us on the concept of dry decon so that they don't turn into giant snow people.
Right, big popsicles. Yeah, absolutely. You brought up a good point, and since you mentioned it,
that's what I do.
But that's what he does. Let's talk about the taping and non-taping real quickly, because before we get into our next segment, because I've seen a lot of pictures fairly recently of the whole let's tape it all, baby. Let's go all the way. Go ahead and hit that for a second.
Well, that was something that, again, sometimes the best of intentions are passed down, and the people who don't understand what the purpose of the tape was at the time, if a little tape is good, a lot of tape is better. Right. The idea behind the tape was, to help with if you're working overhead and you put your hands up, something like that. You didn't want the sleeves to come down. I get those things. And one of the big factors was were we even in the right suits? Because for the longest time, a lot of teams didn't realize that there is a level B suit that is not fit for an SCBA, and there's a level B suit that is fit for an SCBA. Using the terms level A, B, C versus the NFPA, just because it's what we're comfortable with. We could go into the NFPA numbers, but A, B, and C, I think everyone understands what we're talking about. So what we would see is, instead of a little bit of tape up here and then maybe a little bit on the wrist just to keep it in place, not to seal the suit. We're not trying to make a gas tight suit out of a splash protective suit, but that's what some people were starting to do. They were starting to view it that way. And the worst one was the non-SCBA fit suits. We were seeing huge gap right in here, you know, where my multiple chins sit.
That me both, brother.
People were literally layering pieces of tape and making basically like a hazmat bib and trying to manufacture suit on the scene, versus getting the properly fit SCBA level B suit that's actually gathered all the way around and comes right up under elastic wise onto the SCBA. We, until someone showed us and explained to us, hey, you know, there's two different fits of this suit, we just kind of went with what was supplied, and eventually made that change.
you talk about that plate, and I don't want to mention initials or anything, but there was an entity that I was fortunate to attend for meth lab training, and one of the things was, and they called it a tape plate, and they took several pieces of duct tape, and so we made this little square and we put it up over there, and me and the other hazmat person, which you know very well also, looked at them, the two fire guys with all the law enforcement brethren, and we're like, yeah, that's not right. Oh, you know, so we had to go through it. But yeah, so that's not only the fire service, that's gone to other agencies building that plate. But hopefully, I think now the message is getting out to everybody. Listen, if you got to tape that much, you need, one, a bigger suit, or two, a different suit, or maybe both. If you put a piece of tape up here to keep the hood from sliding off, I mean, you should technically have a helmet and all that other stuff, but look, you know, whatever. A piece of tape right here just to hold it in place when you're moving, I got no problem with that. But I remember, as you do, you had remember the buddy tabs, right? We had this thing all the way around. So, and they even taught you pull the buddy tabs so you can pull this off your face mask and it comes off like a nice picture frame. And we're all like, okay. We didn't know any better. That's how everybody was taught, you know?
And tying it back into the topic, which is decon. My gosh, what a nightmare for the decon people, because they're pulling this stuff off, and then inevitably they're going to get the tape stuck to them, and they're trying to get it off of them, and now they're flinging it, and do we have contaminant now being flung all over the place? It was just, we were creating more of a problem than we were good. But that comes back to the application of what we were taught, the chemical physical properties, the design of the PPE, proper decon. Do we need liquid? Can we do it dry? Can we just wipe this down? All those things. We kind of just defaulted back to information that was, well, this is what I was taught by this person who was taught by this person who was taught by this person. And we have this degradation of the information as to why we were doing this. And then it's in our nature. If a little bit's good, a lot's got to be better. So
that's right. So with that, let's go into our main topic of the main topic is decon, but here's a couple little tricks, little things that will help you on your way. Go ahead, take it away.
So, I mean, obviously the first thing we want to look at is, what is our state of matter? We're dealing with a liquid here. This is triethylamine. So liquid, obviously depending on what our mission is, we may come into contact with the liquid. It's a flammable liquid. So we start looking at that flammable liquid. Again, what is our mission? What are we doing? Are we going to be in our fire resistive bunker gear? most likely. If we're going to be doing something where it's a small leak and we're trying to just patch the leak, maybe upgrading to compatible gloves, maybe some sleeves, something like that. So we still have that fire resistant, or you even have your flash protective suits. There's all sorts of options you have. We're not going to get into the PPE side of it, but essentially we have a hydrocarbon, which, if we remember our chemistry, for the most part, hydrocarbons, if we do have that on us, we need to break that liquid down. We're going to need some sort of a surfactant to break it down. So some of the easy ways to look at it is, if it's, when you look at your properties, if the solubility is below 10%, water is not going to be enough. Above 10%, there's a good chance that water will be enough to wash that product off. But below 10%, you're going to need more than water. You're going to need a surfactant. But realistically, why don't we just absorb this product off of us? We can use paper towels. We can use pads. We can use all sorts of things to absorb the bulk of whatever product may be on the person. Then we can clean it off from there, depending on what we need.
Yeah.
And then,
go ahead.
Yeah, then Bob, you always point out the first aid side of it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I try to impress upon people, I think we waste a lot of time in trying to decide PPE and whatever. And like I said, like Derek said, you know, what's your mission? If my mission is just recon, let's look at this real quickly. If I look at this NIOSH page and I drop right down underneath the UEL and LEL, it says class 1B flammable liquid. All right, flammable. What do I need? Bunker gear.
Bunker gear.
So if I need bunker gear and it's flammable, I probably need what meter? 4-gas meter, an LEL sensor, right? And then I go to routes of exposure, and the very first thing says inhalation, SCBA. So just that quickly, bunker gear, SCBA, at least at a minimum 4-gas meter. And this is to do recon. Now, if I, like Derek said, if I'm having to work with the product, as we can see, the ideal H is 200 parts per million. Okay, there's some things we could change. And again, we're not getting into the whole PPE structure, but this is just so you can look at things real quickly. But getting back to the decon segment, look over at first aid underneath skin. Soap, wash. They tell you right there what you need to do for decon. I need soap because I need a surfactant, and then obviously water, and there's my decon. So just that quickly, you're able to find your decon, find your initial PPE, and air monitor, you're good to go in like 30 seconds.
Yep. And this is definitely for, I mean, we have all sorts of, like we said, like we were talking about in the beginning, different forms of decon. We have different options available to us. But if by default, I mean, most HazMat teams that probably are listening to us are fire service based. Right. The one thing that fire department always has is water.
Plenty of it.
And soap is easy to carry. So maybe you're not part of a team that has some of the other decon options available, absorbent pads, absorbing powder, all those things, electrostatic decontamination, all those things that maybe your team has. Maybe you're a satellite unit or even just an operations level engine company. You know that you have water. You probably have soap too.
Right.
That right there is enough to get it done.
Right.
Especially if you've got a victim that needs a quick decon. Yeah. Someone that's had this spilled on them. Let's get it off of them.
And a lot of people forget about the gross emergency decon. And I was just doing some training with another department, and one of the scenarios was the chem suicide in a car. And when they went to do decon, and this is something to think about, kids, just because you have the little green bucket, that's not decon. That's not decon for your patient. That's for post-fire. And that's a whole nother topic. Maybe we'll hit another day. But that gross emergency decon, that trash line, that booster line, whatever, unless you've got time to set all that up, the quickest, most effective way is just stretch a line, whatever it is, instead of going through all that, because we're dealing with a patient and time is of the essence. We don't have time to be hooking up the green hose and to get the da-da-da-da-da-da. Get them wet, get them undressed, get them down, and get them out, So.
Yep. Just remember that HazMat equals fog. So if you're running a smooth board, let's not use that for gross decon. Unless we're trying to push the patient back into the hot zone by knocking them off their feet.
Make them do
make sure that we're using the fog and giving them a shower.
Yeah. Exactly. Anything else on this one? It's short and sweet, down and dirty. I mean, that's what this is about. We try to keep these to a point where it's just, good 20-minute drive to work or whatever, little nuggets, for everybody. Anything else?
Well, no, I mean, that's the reality of it is we don't have to overcomplicate it. I mean, we could easily
No.
talk about decon for 8 hours, but is anyone getting any valuable content out of it at that point versus just, hey, here's something to consider. What are the chemical properties? What are the physical properties? All right, go from there.
Yeah. And that's the biggest thing. You hit the nail on the head. People overthink things, and when you do, it's usually not a good thing.
One I do want to add to it, because it's always been asked in class, is water reactive products.
Oh, good. Yeah, hit it.
If it is a water reactive product, we have people who are concerned about performing decon with water. Don't worry about that. When we're talking about water reactive products, we're talking about, I've got a large spill of something. I shouldn't direct a hose line into it, or I should try to keep it isolated from water. The amount of product that's going to be on the PPE or on a victim is limited to how much can actually touch the surface. The amount of water that we're going to be bringing to that, if we choose to use water as a flush system, is going to be copious amounts, more than enough to overwhelm it. And especially when we're talking about patients, it's already, if it is water reactive, we just need to get it off of them because there's water in their skin, there's water in their body. Yeah. So don't worry about that. Flush people with water, copious amounts of water, get it off of them. So don't let the water reactive thing scare you from a gross decon or even a entry person decon. That's not a concern. It's a concern of keeping bulk amounts of the product away from water.
Yeah. Very good point. Yeah, that has come up a lot in a lot of our past trainings. So, all right. Well, let's jump right to some websites for you guys to check out to gather more information. Obviously, our YouTube page has got previous HazChats as well as some other videos where we've looked at different vehicles and some incidents. We've discussed those as well. The HazMat Guys Roundtable show, first Tuesday night of every month, 8 p.m. Eastern. Myself, Bobby, Mike, and Jeff Zintek do that one live. Feel free to chime in. And then some Facebook groups. HazMat Group 2. I think we're the largest, I'm not mistaken, Facebook HazMat group. I think we got 9,500 and going higher. But there's also HazMat Group and Common Sense Group. All three are great places for resources and asking questions. What's your shirt say? Show that puppy off.
So I've been getting shirts sent to me and as gifts and things like that are involving chemistry shirts. And this is my latest one, which is the element of surprise. So any of our chemistry nerds have probably already seen something like that, but I finally got a shirt for it. So, I'm going to try to feature some of my fun little shirts that I keep getting because it's switched from people sending me and getting me gifts as fire department shirts to now I'm getting chemistry shirts. So
we've got one. I'll spoil the surprise because it's going to be a while before they see it. Derek and I'm notorious for this, and he hounds me all the time. When the plane stops, I'm that guy, right? I'm the guy that steps up. I got to stretch my legs, stand in the aisle, even though they don't even have the ramp way to the plane yet. So one of our recent, I think it was Baltimore, wasn't it? On the way to Baltimore?
I believe so.
Yeah. So Derek
Oklahoma City.
That's right. That's where it was. I should have worn the damn shirt now. I wasn't thinking about it. And it says, "Don't stand when the plane stops." And it's like, yeah. So he got these two shirts and we both wore them. We look like a couple of boobs on the plane wearing the same shirt, but everybody thought that was funny shit. And it was. So I have to obviously step up my game a little bit.
It made the flight attendants laugh, and
they were taking pictures with us.
Taking pictures with us.
Yeah, we were like rock stars.
And there's actually just I think recently here I saw a news article. 23 people were having a very close connecting flight
coming into Fort Lauderdale. And they actually ended up, when they made the announcement to let those 23 people get off first, pretty much half the plane stood up while the plane's still in flight and started getting their stuff out of the overhead compartments. So they could try to beat these people that need connecting flights. I don't know.
God.
But it's like, come on, people, we can do better. Just sit down.
Yeah.
When the 3 aisles in front of you or rows in front of you have started getting their stuff, then start moving.
Right.
There's no reason standing there with your head like this because the overhead compartment is right there. You look like an idiot. I don't want your backpack smacking me in the face. I'm just going to keep listening to my music, and I'll wait till the end.
And this wraps up another episode of How to Travel with Bob and Derek.
Yes.
We've got all kinds of funny travel stories.
We are the yin and yang of travel.
We are indeed. All right, so let's get right to why everybody's really watching this, which they must be really bored. I don't know.
I think it was the witty banter at the beginning. No one wants to listen to what we're going to talk about next.
Now, oh, good God! So, certainties on a hazmat call, meaning, what guarantees, what things do you think are always involved, or maybe should be involved? And I'll give you one. We talked about a while ago in our department. Well, it's not mine anymore. I'm gone. Where we were dispatching hazmat units to hazmat calls, obviously, without a rescue truck. We call them rescue trucks. People call them ambulances, boxes, whatever. Basically, the 2 firefighter paramedics in the rescue truck to stand by in case, God forbid, somebody gets hurt. And
a transport capable unit.
Ooh, see, you're so more politically correct than I am. That's why you're further in rank than I got, and I'm retired and whatevs. But anyway, yes, a transport capable apparatus. And we had a problem for a while. It took, and even to this day, sometimes OFD will send them, sometimes they won't, and a lot of it, and they're very busy. I mean, it's just, as is every department anymore, busy, doesn't have enough units and whatever, and that's a topic for another day. But one of the things I think you should always consider is having that ready rescue on scene. Well, you absolutely need to have them on scene if they're making an entry into something. If you're having to crimp a gas line, if you're having, whatever, an odor call, but then you start getting into, well, we didn't do it for this one. Why are we doing it for that one? So, to me, it should be black and white, no gray area here. If a hazmat call is dispatched, a rescue should, even if they go non-emergency at first, but they should at least be on the road. So that's my one certainty I think that should happen. How about you?
Yeah, and to steal a phrase that I've been seeing a lot on the fire side of things is you see a lot of expect fire, expect victims. Same thing with anything we go to. We go with the expectation that we may need these resources. If we don't need them, we've always been taught it's easier to cancel something when you don't need it than it is to request it when you already need it. So obviously departments are constrained by what resources they have available. At the same time, we need to consider, if we're going to something that we're expecting is a hazardous environment, we have to understand and appreciate the fact that at the point that we're arriving could be the point that incident goes critical. We don't know the situation prior to getting there. If it goes critical as we arrive on scene and we have a need for a transport unit, calling for it at that point is too late. It needs to be en route. We need to have it there for ourselves, for our entry team personnel in case something goes bad, but also for the potential victim. Someone called this in. So is this a facility where people are still inside? Is it a residential structure, an apartment building where maybe other occupants haven't left? We will never be questioned for bringing resources to a scene, but we will always be questioned for not having those resources available. It's the standard of care.
Yep.
What would someone else with the same level of training and the same information do? And we've got to start thinking about it. We don't go to man down EMS calls where we know that a lot of times it may be someone who's sleeping. We still send transport units.
True.
Sparks coming from an outlet. We send a lot of departments send the
Everybody.
first alarm. Maybe not everyone's going emergency, but we're assuming that there's the possibility that there's a fire in the wall. There's something that we haven't seen, more information that we need. Same thing with HazMat. The person calling it in is only giving us the information that they know or suspect. Until we get there, we have to assume that we're going to need those resources.
Yep. So I promised last month that I didn't have it on, but I would wear it. We talked about Derek and I have traveling experiences.
Is this about your thong?
No, shh. We have had some travel experiences that, well, since I mentioned went off the rails, I've definitely gone off the rails. So we mentioned that Derek had purchased a shirt for both of us. I think it was for the Oklahoma conference, right?
Yep.
And because I'm this guy, stop standing up when the plane lands. So he got the shirts. I promised last month I would wear it. There you go. There you go. Okay. So it still fits. Anyhow, I try not to be that guy anymore sometimes when I have my travel partner.
Yeah, you did good. We did good.
What's new with
Well,
you,
hey,
bud?
with what's going on in airplanes now, I think standing up is not even a concern anymore. So, you know, I'd be glad if people just stood up when the plane lands compared
It's
to
a
the
little
other stuff going
crazy,
on.
isn't it?
My
It's
goodness.
too bad they won't
My
let me
goodness.
carry on the plane. But as I just alluded to, this topic's going to be about leadership. We're going to talk a little about leadership, but more specifically, mentorship. So that's something that I was on vacation with, sort of mini vacation with my mentor in the HazMat world. A lot of you know, Toby Bevilacqua, and just taking a little walk that you get to do on the 7 Mile Bridge in the Keys. It's, you know, when you're with other people of like minds, shit just starts coming out. And one of the things we're gonna working on, and it should be done here pretty quick actually, is a new conference class about mentorship. So that's something we're looking forward to. But Derek and I thought, you know, we thought this would be a good topic to discuss, especially since in our upcoming HazMat HQ magazine, which will also drop in just a couple of days, one of the articles in there by our good friend Kevin Ryan of Baltimore City Fire Department HazMat has a good article in there on leadership. So this is kind of a little lead into that, so to speak. I don't want to take away his thunder at all. But it's important that we have those mentors. So without further ado, Derek, tell me about some of yours and how you saw things in the officer role and so on.
So, I mean, I think that the important thing to remember is that we have mentors across the board. It's not necessarily in one spot, and whether someone was a HazMat person or not doesn't mean that their mentorship didn't enhance us in the HazMat world or on the fire side. So one of my mentors early on was Chief John McCormick. He was my district chief, and he just had a very controlled and decisive way about him. He had a unique way of taking a problem and simplifying it to where it's not a big deal. We can chunk it out into smaller tasks that need to be done, and the big problem is now just a few little challenges. So he was a good mentor for me in that sense, as far as, you know, how I approach the job in general. Like it's easy to look at something and get overwhelmed, but it doesn't take that much if you look at it and start breaking it down and say, how can we make this big problem just some small tasks and eliminate the overwhelming aspects of it.
And knowing Chief McCormick as I do, because he was also a HazMat lieutenant on 101 for a number of years. Was he your lieutenant?
No,
Oh,
he was my district.
Oh, who's your district? You had PJ on there, I think. So looking at him for the HazMat mentorship as well, especially with him being a district right there, because he had a wealth of knowledge in the HazMat community. And that, I think that helps everybody, because, you know, like when I was coming up, there was a lot of, I had some pretty decent lieutenants. Every now and again, you have somebody that's, you know, maybe a little different, but I tried to pick, you know, the best of all of them to try to, you know, who I would be. But as far as the HazMat side of it, of the house, because I was fortunate, I get to be on a truck, you know, Tower One before we had heavy rescue that did dive, high angle, and HazMat. So I had 3 different mentors, if you will, that I looked at for those 3 disciplines. But when I got over to HazMat, I drove Toby, and that really was my mentor for getting me into HazMat. And, you know, the path that I went on, would have never in a million years even consider that this is where I was going to be, and especially doing this right now. I was just a knuckle dragging truckie at the time, but I've evolved a little bit.
Yeah. And I would definitely say that that PJ was definitely my foothold getting into HazMat. He kind of did a little sleight of hand, brought me down for one aspect, and it was like, "Hey, you're part of the HazMat team now."
Hey, congratulations!
So I'll always
How's
credit him with I'll always credit him with getting me down there. As far as the HazMat aspect, I'd say that you know, I shared the same mentor that you have, Toby Bevilacqua, very very knowledgeable. Rick Stilp was also another great mentor for me. He kind of showed me some different avenues in that sense, but probably the most direct influence I had was Michael Pilot.
Without a doubt. You got to work with him a lot more than I did, because we were on different shifts. But yeah, dude, that guy. When we went to the DEA school for meth labs, and we were the only 2 fire guys in the class, and they were asking him to get up and teach the air monitoring part, I was like, holy shit. I mean, this guy can build an air monitor out of twigs, you know? And I got to work with him a little bit in the private industry for an environmental company. But yeah, absolutely, he's up there for sure.
Yeah, well, and the big thing was initially when I was on the HazMat team, started as a firefighter. He was the engineer on B shift, which was the shift that relieved us. And what I would find was I was hanging out for an hour to 2 hours after being relieved, just having conversations with him.
Right.
And the fact that he would take the time to entertain talking to this new HazMat tech that really didn't know a bunch of anything, but was eager to learn. And he put me in the direction of, you know, read this book, learn about this, and not the stuff that was just normally found in the fire service, but he would encourage me to look beyond that and to not only know how the device works, but understand the concepts and the science behind the device. And he and I would have long, in-depth conversations about it, and I'd go look something up and start studying about something and try to figure out, oh, well, I don't understand what this word is. And I find myself going down rabbit holes. And next thing I know, I'm trying to look up information on physics or chemistry that I never thought that I would ever have an interest in, let alone use the fire service. And he just really pushed me to challenge myself into, you know, finding what I was interested in and pursuing that path of HazMat. And that's where I really gravitated towards detection. And since then, I've been able to expand over to other aspects of it. But that was initially my niche, was getting into the detection side, because we had a lot of new technology that was coming out that no one on the team knew anything about.
That's for sure.
I was like, you know, I'm going to focus on this and be the guy that knows how to do that for my shift. And that, you know, it was a lot, but it really gave me a comfort zone to work into, so that then I could develop my knowledge of other aspects of HazMat down the road, but at least knew I had piece of the puzzle that I was the fitting piece for.
Right. So what do you think? Because we've lost, used to have a great sensation. People you would know is like, this girl's got it. Like, I'm going to bring this one in. We used to joke around and say you're getting called up to the big leagues if you came downtown, right? To the big house. And it's not the case anymore. And I'm not talking about Station 1 specifically. I'm talking about the fire service in general, where it comes to special operations. It used to be, you go and get the classes on your own, and now people aren't doing that. So what do you think is a good way to, the whole thing in Baltimore is Habu, help a brother up. How do you think, what's a good way you think we can start getting these guys and gals interested in just hazmat? I mean, that's, everybody wants to jump on a rope and do whatever else, but hazmat's hard to get people sometimes. And it seems it's getting harder and harder. What suggestions might you have? Wise words of wisdom.
Don't know if they're wise or words of wisdom, but I have my opinions, and everyone has one.
Oh,
so I think that, and it may not be a popular opinion, the fire service has to change. We hold on to tradition. Tradition is fantastic. We never want to lose our tradition, but we can't let our tradition be a stumbling block to slowing things down, because even when we had those guys who were motivated to do those things, sought things out on their own, they were still few and far between, because you have guys who come to the fire service and just want to be a firefighter. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with that because of the way we've defined the fire service. There's some people out there that say, are we really the fire service anymore? Or are we now an emergency response or emergency rescue service, or all these different terminologies coming out? And it does beg the question, does fire department really define what we do? Because when we tell people you're going to go to the fire academy, they're not thinking, I'm going to go learn about hazardous materials, or I'm going to go learn about EMS, or I'm going to learn about pub ed, or any of these other things that are all integral parts of the fire service. So, I think that really we can keep the names on departments and things like that, but we have to change our approach from the recruiting aspect through the academy to orientation to our FTO programs out in the field, all the way through to say, yes, these skills are important. We will always be called upon to put out fires. We'll always be called upon to save lives and do those things. We also are being called upon to respond to hazardous materials events, EMS calls. Unfortunately, still cat in a tree. Like, we're doing these things, and that's not going to change. And as much as we may have some people who avoid those aspects of the job, it really needs to be that it's not something that just specialized teams do. Obviously, your specialized teams will be the lead role in those things,
right?
But everyone has to take some ownership and some role in there. And a lot of that's going to come through the people who are in those spots, the instructors, the field training officers, the company officers, all those things, to mentor those personnel and pass on that knowledge and experience they have. Because we have a whole generation that's coming in and they're eager to learn. One of the challenges we have is we have to adapt to the way that they learn.
Exactly.
And that can be difficult, but we also need to make them have a realistic expectation of the job that they're getting into.
Right.
It's not just a come into work, run fire calls, go home. We are here for public safety, and these are the myriad of types of incidents we should run to, and you need to be competent, at least competent, not an expert. You don't have to be a high, just be competent in those things.
Right.
So that everyone has some role that they can play.
I think too, something we can do. And if you're a training officer, you're one of the gang that does the orientation, whether you're detailed for that week or month or whatever, I think it's really upon those people to help light the fire right then and there of, hey, listen, these are the different things that are afforded you in our department, that if you want to go that route, we suggest you do this. We got to start early on, because at least in the hazmat side of it, they get crushed in the academy. And, I say this all the time when I do with our ops class, is I ask every one of them, I bet I know how your first week of hazmat was in the academy. And it started off with, all right, this is going to be the longest week of your life. And they plant that bad seed in somebody's head right off the bat, and then forget about it. You're not getting them unless it's just somebody that's into some of that stuff. So first thing that needs to change is instructors of the academy need to stop teaching like that. Number one. Number two is, I think like I said, when you get them on board and you're in orientation, start giving little doses of stuff, let them try putting on a suit or whatever. I mean, they have to do some of it in orientation anyhow. And I think that, we always joke around that that's kind of the tryouts to see who's going to go to what shift. But it really is, because you get to see, hey, this person's picking up this pretty quick. Maybe we do want to have them go to station 1, because they're eventually, they'll go from engine 1 to 101, or however your system is wherever you're at. But you're sizing them up in orientation. So why not help that size up and give them a little bit of taste to see what it is they like? And I think if we start there, well, then that is the beginning of pushing that person up into a different realm of the job, so to speak.